Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Northview podcast. I am joined today with Brian Clark, student pastor at Northview Christian Church. Brian, how are you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. It's funny that we're asking how we're doing and we're in the same building, but that's okay.
Where are you right now? You're not in your office.
I'm not. I'm in my secret office. That
I feel like you have a lot of secret offices because when I walk down the hall to go talk to you, you're never in your office. I don't know where you
But
are.
I'm always here.
Yeah, your car is always here. Yeah, you're hiding.
I'm never in an office with like a couch or a beanbag chair like Guy Raz might be.
Yeah, totally.
Hey, so you got a chance to preach this past weekend.
Uh-huh.
It was your first crack at preaching to the mostly empty room. It's intriguing because more so than Nathan, I think that you desire and need audience feedback. So what was that experience like?
Yeah, so when you're telling stories and using, humor and whatnot, like I cracked a joke in there. I think I said something about a real crisis would be if we lost Wi-Fi and we couldn't watch the Tiger King.
Right.
That's a hilarious joke, right?
Right. And I laughed internally because I couldn't laugh out loud. Because then it's even
but
more
nobody
awkward.
laughs, and so you just gotta know that you gotta move on. Yeah, no, it's weird. It's totally weird. I would absolutely rather have people in the room.
Right.
100%. Yeah.
Well, I got tons of great feedback. I know my wife was laughing when we were watching the message, and other people on our online church platform were just dying.
Well,
Teresa Land, yeah.
Hey, listen, I have a disclaimer about the sermon.
Okay.
Because I
This
totally
is the very
lied.
first thing that's ever happened before. Wow. Okay.
I totally lied. Yes, totally lied in the sermon. Didn't know. So me and Logan are watching it on the couch, and I was talking about her calling me the neck.
Right.
Because the size of my neck is too big for my body.
Can we see it real quick, by the way?
Yeah,
like
I mean,
looking.
I feel like my beard, she likes it when I grow my beard because it makes it look smaller, right? If I'm clean shaven, you just see this, she calls it a thumb. I got a thumb on the top. Well, anyway, so she's watching this thing, and I saw, my wife calls me the neck, and she looks over at me and she says, "I've never called you that." I said, "Oh, maybe it was my sister. I don't know. Somebody."
Hey, but in the moment though, I mean, it felt like your wife says
neck,
that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe
I
also thought maybe that's just my own nickname that I give myself whenever I'm like wrestling my kids or something,
Well, I did see your sister post on Facebook that she had called you that. So, it's not self-imposed. Yeah. So you are the master of storytelling, and I can tell you that. So what is it for you that draws you to stories? Because when you preach, I mean, your messages are very story driven.
Yeah, I feel like when I preach, I like to have three things, if I can, in every sermon. You can't always do it, but
I don't know if I want everybody to hear this, because I know one of the answers, and it is pretty awesome how you are able to do it. All right, go ahead.
Well, here's what I try to do. Okay, is I want to have, obviously you're going to start out with scripture, right? You're going to have the scripture. You're going to have that every time. But number two, I always want a story. Okay, a good story to go with that. And number three, I didn't do it this week, or this last week, but symbol. So scripture, story, symbol, and symbol might be some physical object, that goes along. It just helps you remember the sermon for later, So that's kind of.
Well, you didn't answer what I thought you were going to say.
What was that?
You have another thing that you try and do in your sermons, and it's what a good comedian will do, is you have a thread of one thing that you try and come back to every now and then. Yeah. So you really.
I learned that one from a youth pastor in California. He did that really well, and he would do it with humor, and he would bring that back into the sermon over and over and over. But yeah, as far as storytelling goes, I don't know. I mean, I feel like my Grandpa Irvin, who had a lot of stories himself, um, he was a great storyteller. And I remember as a little kid watching him command the attention of the entire family around the dinner table with his stories. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
as a kid not necessarily listening to the story per se,
Right.
but trying to watch him tell the story and see where he had his pauses, where he had his crescendos, and I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what a nerd,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
Like,
Right.
I was such a nerdy kid, like analyzing how he told a story. But as a little kid, I always wanted to be a great storyteller.
I think that's what Jesus, did so well when he was teaching, is coming back to the story, because, as a communicator, I know that a story is what buys the audience back. So if you're losing them potentially, or you've just shared something heavy, a story helps kind of alleviate the tension, or it
Totally,
right.
totally. You and I have talked about this and how, like, I feel like a sermon is a meal, right? And so, like, if you are serving steak, right? I feel like that's the scripture, that's the meat, right? Whatever. But you don't want to just have steak. I don't. I want to
I
have some
agree with you.
sides. I want to have
Yeah.
some dessert, right? And so I want to
Yeah.
have some other flavors in there that make the steak taste even better. So
I
there we
wish
go.
I could figure out a cute way to bring in the meat sweats, but I don't know how to. So we'll transition out of steak and into, I don't know if many people know your background story. So this is just a really cool opportunity to just dive into your past. What really was your call to ministry? How did you know that ministry was something that you wanted to pursue with your career?
Dude, my call to ministry is so lame. I don't know about I don't know about
Come on, man.
yours.
You can no, you can mold it into something amazing and epic.
No, listen. I always, at Ozark Christian College, you'd hear these guys, they had this crazy, amazing story about how God called them into ministry. And I was trying to be a pharmacist. I was trying to be a drug dealer.
I didn't know.
And yeah.
Well, that's a different. See, there you go.
Hey,
You were
man.
able to take it and mold it a little bit. We don't know if it's legal or illegal.
I was trying to be a pharmacist, and it wasn't happening, and you got to be kind of smart to do that, and it just wasn't happening for me. So I'm like, well, what else could I do? Well, maybe youth ministry, right? So I just I had a youth leader in my life at that time that was speaking into my life, and David Shaw was his name, and he encouraged me to check out that line of work, and so I did, and I felt like God was it was made sense. But man, I tell you, when I was in California, I had served out there for 7 years, and I really began to question my call into ministry. And I remember they gave us a sabbatical, or you get like 30 days to kind of rest, relax, hear from God, whatever. And so I remember I was on a beach, and I felt like God was saying, listen, or no, I was asking God, I was like, hey, listen, I'm wondering if I shouldn't even like be in ministry anymore. I'm starting to question the whole thing, whatever. And over that 30 days of being out there on the beach and, doing other things, whatever, I really came to process that. And it said, I felt like God was asking me two questions. What are you good at? And then what do you like to do? Those are two separate, they could be the same thing, but not necessarily. What are you good at and what do you like to do? And so I started making a list of both things, and a lot of them crisscrossed with ministry. And I felt like he was saying to me, listen, you can get out of ministry if you want to. It's fine. I will bless. I didn't feel like he was going to curse me, right?
Right.
But he
Right.
said, I created you, and you're going to be most fulfilled in the work of ministry. And so that was my real call. I felt like it happened 7 years after I began to work in
Wow.
in ministry.
one thing that if you're listening or watching that you may not know about Brian, and he's will blush because I'm saying this, but just the way that he prays and interacts with the Lord is it inspires me and the way that I want to do that. No, you're good.
Stop.
You're good, man. You're good. But I think, you just see a neck and you don't know like what else is there, but his heart for the Lord is tremendous. And I think that's why it was so exciting for me to get the opportunity to work alongside of you at the same place where you come in after what I was doing. So awesome.
Yeah, because we were right down the road from each other, weren't we, in California?
Yeah, just go through Garlic Country and Gilroy and we're there. All right, let's transition into your message. So you walked us through two stories that happened back to back where the disciples, they almost died twice within a few hours.
Twice.
I mean, surely you, of all people, cannot relate to what they experienced, correct?
Like dying, being, putting your life at risk, right?
Yeah, I mean.
Oh, man. I don't know. Sean, have you ever felt like in the moment, like this could be it? Like I could die right now. Have you ever been there?
I can think of, yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Speaking of California, my wife and I, we were driving to Oakland, which is a scary proposition to begin with. And we were on one of those massive highways. And in front of me, I see this semi that begins to jackknife, and it cut across all the different lanes.
Wait, was it coming? It was coming towards you or with?
No, we were in the same lane of traffic, like the same flow, and it just hit something. It turned completely sideways. And I remember doing like this Gone in 60-second move, like boom, boom, boom. But like when you were done, we just looked at each other like that was it. Like, that could have been it. So that, I mean, for sure in that moment, I felt like that was the end.
I mean, I feel like I've had moments where I look back on and I realize, whoa, that was pretty serious, but never in the moment have I ever been scared where I was thinking, this could be it. I look back on like, I blew up one of my dad's barns right in front of my face. I mean, I look back on that. There's still a tree where that barn used to be, and half the tree is dead because the fireball and Chata, man. I remember, oh man, I could go through, oh gosh, so many, but never. Now my wife, I went rafting with her and almost killed her, and she was drowning. She was drowning, and so she could tell you she said her last prayer then. But never have I, even in that moment, was I ever like, this is it,
Right.
I'm just enjoying the moment.
Do you think all of the disciples going, so they're on the sea and then they get to the land with the crazy guy, and we'll get into all that in a minute, but do you feel like any of them were uttering their last prayer? Like Peter's like, oh Lord, or Judas was like, how can I get more money? Or, I don't know.
That was good.
Should we be digging on them? I don't know.
I don't know. But, you got the sons of thunder, James and John. I want to be buddies with those guys in heaven. Like, just because Jesus nicknames them the sons of thunder, they've got to be guys that you want to go have a drink with, right?
Well, Mac, your son is definitely a son of thunder. I feel like, if we're calling you Odin, he is Thor for sure.
Oh
little Greek mythology.
Man, yeah, I feel like, you probably got some guys there that are probably pretty nervous. I feel like Matthew, the tax collector. I mean,
he's assessing everything. Like,
what a nerd, right?
Well, the probability of getting out of this situation
and. Excuse me, Jesus. We got a situation brewing right here. No, man.
We're getting struck down, man, for all this. Nathan's pulling the plug if he watches this. He's like, we'll never let these two guys go again.
Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like, and tell me what you are. I'm a story over safety guy. Like I would
Yeah,
rather have an amazing story out of a situation versus having safety. What are you?
I'm definitely a safety guy, and
Really?
I can prove it. Like my daughter Gianna and I were at the park the other day, and there's that huge hill,
Yeah.
and she was on her bike, kind of towing down. I said, just go for it, just go for it. Well, she slipped and she went for it. And as she's going down, I'm like, oh no, oh no, oh no, like chasing after her, waiting, so like if I had been you, I think I've been like, touchdown, here we go.
Man, it's either going to be the best thing that ever happened or the worst thing that ever happened. But either way, you're going to have an amazing story.
So, all right, let me jump back. The disciples had experienced 11 miracles before this miracle happened on the sea. And some of these
I did not
miracles
know
had,
that.
yeah,
Okay.
I was curious looking into it. And so we had water into wine, which is like, blue, nothing miraculous about that. But Jesus healed some, all right, there was a miracle, but Jesus healed some people. He even raised somebody from the dead.
Yeah.
Why do you think,
Yeah.
and you made a big deal about this in your message, why do you think now with the calming of the sea, the
Yeah.
disciples were terrified with what they
I,
had
I
just
think
seen?
I think you're onto something though, because that's the point of the story was you can't explain that away. That you can't like the water into wine, right?
Hmm.
If somebody can explain that, they had some hidden or that, whatever. Uh you have I don't know.
I
There's a lot
understand
of
what
them,
you're saying.
there's a lot of them that you could kind of force an explanation. But one thing you can't force, you cannot explain away, is if there is a storm
Right,
and then you say quiet and it just boom. I mean, it's
right,
never happened, and nobody. And I feel like at that point, the point of the passage is to say that Jesus is in control, and so he gives back to back circumstances. Right, he's
right,
in control over nature,
right.
and he's in control over the spiritual realm. Like there's nothing that he is not in control of, and these are big threatening things that he's confronted with.
Hmm.
And for the disciples, the point of the story is they're not enough. Their strength, our strength, is not enough to overcome this. And then Jesus wakes up half asleep and is like, hey, stop it. And then
Right.
there. And what's interesting about that story though, and we didn't get into it in the sermon, but when he calms the storm, it says that they were terrified.
Right.
What does that tell us? It tells us that they woke him up not to calm the storm. They did not wake him up so that they
Hmm.
didn't expect it. So
Yeah.
what did they wake him up for? They woke him up to bail water, to help them bail water out of the boat.
Wow.
How many times have our prayers been for God to bail water? And he's saying, no, I want to do something so much more than bail
Okay.
water.
Come on, man. Preach. Preach. Dude.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, man.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and so the point of the story is that he is absolutely in control. And so my illustration of an ant walking across my desk here and saying, hey, I'm going to hurt you real bad. I'm like, okay, whatever, you know, my biggest crisis,
Right.
which I'm not enough to handle. I'm not strong enough. I'm not whatever. It's an ant on his desk, and he's
So
got
that,
this.
that really kind of ties into the next question I want to ask you. So if they were not expecting Jesus to calm the storm and then he does it, and they're like, oh man, well, then they get to this other side of the lake which, we would call it the other side of the tracks, or, the bad part of town. They're not wanting to be there.
Right.
Do you think that they were afraid when they got there? Do you think that they were already forgetting the fact that Jesus had calmed the storm and like he can protect them even on the wrong side?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, nobody can know, right? But we can make a guess.
Right.
And I mean, I just know that they were I just know that what happens to me when I cross borders.
Hmm.
And when I'm not talking about, like whenever I'm in Oklahoma and I cross the border into Texas, I hate it, right? Nobody likes Texas, okay? So, that's what we're talking about here.
I wouldn't go to either, but I understand what you're saying.
Just kidding. But I'm saying, Texas still America, barely, I guess.
Barely.
But, like when we go over to, like we're taking a Honduras mission trip, or, we're playing one, or when we go to Mexico or something like that, your attention goes up a little bit because
Right.
it's just not, they don't speak the same language. Their culture is
Right.
completely different. And for them, they really looked at the Gentiles as enemies. And so, yeah, I think they're uncomfortable to some degree. I don't know to what degree, but it's the dead of night, and they land near a graveyard, thousands of pigs, two naked, bloody men
right.
running.
Right. I mean, before they even see the pigs and the dudes, right? Like they're already on edge. And then you get to this, situation where these two naked guys coming possessed by demons, like not just naked guys, but like possessed by demons, and they confront Jesus. And we're having this sermon series of, these confrontations with Jesus, not in a bad way, but just where he gets really close in an uncomfortable way. And you did a great job of just saying these guys, they got into Jesus' space and he didn't back away. What do you think? I mean, what does that tell us about Jesus?
Well, again, the point of the story is that Jesus is in control. I mean, think about this. I said this in the sermon, but I really wish I could have fleshed it out, that Jesus is the most powerful being in the universe. And so it is actually impossible for him to be nervous. I don't think that's an emotion that he's ever shared in terms of like what's going to happen. Nervous.
Right.
We know he was nervous going into the cross,
Right.
And that was a nervousness of, because he did know what was going to happen. But the nervousness that we get of being unsure of a situation, he's never known that, and will never know that. And so, the good news of that is that he's on my side, that I can hide behind him, or I can always go to him with whatever I'm dealing with, and he is more than enough. Now, interestingly enough, that crisis, he allowed both of those crises to happen to his disciples. Mm-hmm. He did not. Right. Now, he could have completely avoided those, but that's not. It's never what's good for us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, I think that speaks loudly to not just the time we're living in today, but just living in general. Like, we're never going to avoid crisis. We're never going to avoid hard things. And to know that Jesus is not going to let us avoid it, but he's going to be with us through that process.
I agree. And I think some people are more naturally nervous than others, right? But it doesn't matter. At some point in all of our lives, we all have our faith shaken, our foundation shaken, and it comes down to, what are you going to fear, and what are you going to trust in? What are you going to trust? What are you going to fear? At the end of the day, it happens to every single one of us.
Help me take a step towards that, towards believing that, towards accepting that, even if it's a baby step of like, Pastor Brian, I know you're saying this and I want that, but I don't know how to do that. Like, where can I go first, or help me? Yeah. Just help me take that step.
Well, what we read in that passage earlier, and I didn't bring this up at all, but it's in there, is when they start crossing the lake, it says in there, it says that in verse 36 of chapter 4, it says, there were also other boats with him. That their boat was not the only boat. So the interesting thing about it is the only boat that landed that we know of was the one that Jesus was in. And so what I'm saying, what I'm trying to draw out of this passage is stay with Jesus. You know, even if you wake him up to bail water and you're saying, hey, you know, and you're calling on him to do something small in your life, the fact that you're with him, the fact that you're calling on him is a comforting thing, because they made it even with him saying, hey, you guys, you don't understand who I am. Well, they were with him though.
Right.
And I guarantee you there's not a person on this planet, not you, not me, that understand who Jesus is completely.
Right. For sure.
And he's trying to beg us to say, hey, no, I'm bigger than what you think that I am.
Right.
I mean, Sean, what would your life look like right now if you understood how big he was?
I mean, I don't even know if I can begin to scrape the surface of what that answer would be.
That's the question. And I want to live like that.
Right.
If I had full understanding of how big he was, and not only how powerful he was, but also that he's on my side, what does that begin to change in how I live my life?
Right.
Number one, I connect to him daily, right? Because if he's the most powerful thing and he's on my side, I want to connect to him. But number two, I'm out there a little bit.
Yeah. So this naked demon possessed guy.
Yeah.
And we don't even need to get into it. Your message did such a phenomenal job of depicting the total craziness of that situation. So if you've not listened to it, you have to go to our YouTube page, go to our Facebook page, and you can check that out. But at the end of that story, he is transformed by the power of Jesus. Yeah. And he wants, I mean, this is actually interesting on what you just said. He wants to get in the boat and he wants to go. And that's Jesus says, actually, I want you to stay here. Why do you think that Jesus had him stay?
Yeah, I wonder, do you think that guy was disappointed whenever Jesus said no?
I would be. I mean, just from a purely human standpoint, like, you just changed my life. There's power in you, like, that I can't begin to understand. Like, of course I would want to. And I think this is where that transformation and staying was so hard is he's then got to live with the history of who he was.
Yes.
With these people and being fully aware now who I was, and now I've got to deal with it.
And that is it right there. You nailed it, because what you said is the history piece, that we tend to see that as a negative, right? They know who I am.
Right.
But Jesus saw the positive in that. Yeah, they know who you were.
Right.
And so there's this story where 4 friends take their friend that was crippled, and they dig a hole in the roof and they lower him down to Jesus. Jesus forgives him and then heals him to prove that he had the power to forgive him. And so when he heals him, he says to him something so interesting to me. And Scott McFarland, my boss in California, preached this 15 years ago. I don't know. And I never forgot this sermon. And I've just kind of made it my own.
Yeah.
But he said that Jesus told that guy, he said, take your mat and go. Take your mat and go. Why did he want him to take his mat? So he could get out of his way so that he could preach some more? Like clean up your trash? No. No, it's his mat was his past. His mat is his testimony. That's his story. And so he's walking. You don't walk with a mat. Right. You know what I'm saying? If you're crippled, You need that mat to lay down on. Well, people don't have a mat like that. And so there's a story there, right? And so your bad experiences, your bad, things in your life that have changed, right? That's your mat. That's your story. And so this guy definitely had his past. He had his story, and he was changed. And so that's his testimony. And so Jesus said, no, you've got a story here. And I love, like I was talking to one of our youth leaders the other day, and I was telling her, I said, I love the fact that you have a much different story than I have, because I grew up in church, I never really departed from God. I never really made, I had a lot of crazy things that have happened, but not like, I never,
Right.
not sinful things, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Totally understand.
I can connect with a certain kind of student pretty easy, but there's a whole other student group that I just don't connect with. And so when someone who has lived that life is able to step into ministry, they're able to reach those students or reach those families that, I can't. And so you take what God has changed and you use that for his glory in your life.
And what we know about that story is Jesus comes
Yeah.
back to that same area, and then there's 4,000 plus people that gather to hear more about him. So you know that this guy lived it out. He shared that story. He didn't just hide it.
Yeah, because they asked him to leave. The townspeople said, because they see Jesus and he's so powerful, and that's why he got back in the boat and was leaving. It was because the townspeople asked him, "Hey, can you just leave?"
Right.
Well, that's a cold reception right there. Well, he comes back sometime later, and they're saying, "Come on."
Right. So I want to kind of wind down our time together and ask you, I think there is power, like you're saying, in the story, in the transformation story. And I do think that sometimes we're afraid of sharing that or living that out for fear of whatever it might be. When have you seen just some amazing Jesus transformation stories in other people's lives that we could just be encouraged by, but also to know that our story does matter? And I love what you shared, that you may not have that big, crazy come to Jesus story where you were in the gutter and you came out. You just kind of were faithful, and maybe had moments where you doubted, but you remained faithful. And I love your call to ministry story, because you were even doing ministry for 7 years before God really cemented in your heart. But when have you experienced other people? Maybe you don't even need to share a name, but like, what's a transformation story that has stuck out to you in all of your days?
So I really appreciate both sides of this, like you were saying, the ones that have big, uh, obvious change, and then the ones that, let me start with a lot of students, a lot of adults that I've seen that grew up like I did, because you grow up in the church and you don't really ever depart. You kind of make a decision. Like, I got baptized when I was 8 years old, barely 8. Okay. I was really young. In fact, later on in my life, I thought maybe I was too young, because I really didn't understand. It was like, okay, as a young child, I thought, okay, if I give my life to Jesus, I get to go to heaven. And then if I don't, I get to go to hell.
Right.
That's not a hard choice to me.
Snickers or broccoli.
And so I was like, yeah, I love Jesus. I love, I'm gonna give my life to him. And I never really departed from that. Listen, when you're older and you hear all these like stories from people that were, in the world and of the world, and then they come to Jesus, have this dramatic change in their life, you're always impressed by that. I still am. I love those stories. But here's the thing, I would still rather have my story. And for sure, I would rather my kids have my story. Because here's the thing, if you're in the world and of the world, that always, always, always comes with consequences. yeah, you got this great story, but I promise you, you've paid for it and probably are still paying for it.
Right.
And that's not to diminish the change that's happened, but I'm saying I would always rather have that story, even as boring as it
Right.
sounds.
Right.
I think that to me is always my favorite transformation story is whenever, you see these young children or students or whatever getting baptized and they've got solid families in the Lord. And that, I think that's
Right.
the way it's supposed to work. But yeah, we've had some students that I remember. This girl in the youth ministry, she started a Christian club in her school in California, and it was not appreciated by the school, by a lot of people. She took a lot of flack for that. I mean, it was near San Francisco, so
Right.
you can
Right.
understand.
Right.
And she did it anyway, and I went to it, and it was pretty bad. I mean, it was not polished, in terms, because you know how we are. We try to put on a polished
Right.
experience. And so I go to that and it was just really bad and I felt uncomfortable. But here's what happened. It wasn't about the program or the show or, all that, it was about relationships and it was about Jesus. And she was able to convert Tyler Zelmer, who then converted his whole family. She was able to convert Danielle Wasson, who then went home and converted her whole family. And then the Wassons, they reached their friends and converted them. Man, it was, and I could go down.
Right.
I've actually used that illustration before, where so many people came from the Lord because of her transformation and her boldness, and then it translated into it's awesome. I love
Right.
that.
Right. Well, I feel, I mean, I want to just challenge anybody that's watching right now. This is kind of unscripted, but just to say, share your story right now with somebody,
Right,
or
right.
or get online like right now, like we are, and just post a video. Your story's got power, and you think about Matthew chapter 5 where it says that we don't cover a light, but we want it to shine. Let that light, let it shine right now, and share that. I think there's great power in that.
Sean, you know this, and you can speak to this, but I feel like the most success that Christians have had in reaching other people have not come from arguments, and they have not come from Bible studies. What
Right.
they have come from is stories. Here's how God has changed me, and
Right.
then they see that mixed with your love for them and how you've treated them already, and it's like, man, I'm interested in that. Thoughts on that?
No, totally agree. I mean, we were talking. I was talking to my neighbor about working at Sonic. I worked at Sonic in college, and
Okay. Now here's the deal with Sonic. I don't like going there because they expect a tip.
not if you drive through.
Oh, okay.
Not if you drive through. I agree with you. little insider tip right there.
Yeah,
For the
there you
tip.
go.
But I remember being the Bible college kid that was a manager and worked with some interesting individuals, will say that, but just I treated them like Jesus would treat me, and shared and prayed with them. And I don't remember any conversion stories, but I remember walking away knowing that I was loved as a manager because Jesus transformed the way that I have been treated, and I want to treat people in the same way. So, I mean, I agree with exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, and you're hitting on something really important there, because this guy that went back, he wanted to go in the boat and all this and everything. He went back, and then Jesus told everybody about it. They were not converted then. He got them one step closer to being interested in Jesus. And so that when he came back and saw Jesus, they then had that moment. I think I put a lot of pressure on my life, in the past, of trying to, like, I needed to see baptisms. I needed to see people converted. And really, I think what is most important is the look back on the wake. If a boat is going through the water, you have a wake, and look back at the wake of your life and see, how have you left those relationships? Are they better because they knew you, or are you leaving a wake of destruction, right? And so, like, are you getting people closer to Jesus? The danger in that I will say is that sometimes we don't put enough pressure on ourselves to have the actual conversation.
Right.
Sometimes we just got to be bold and say, hey,
Right.
Would you like to come to church with me? And then they do. And then you got to follow it up with like, hey, what was your experience like? What did you think?
Right. It's like Francis of Assisi's brother, preach the gospel, and if necessary, actually use words.
Yeah. But
something like that.
Yeah. But don't be afraid to use the words.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, man, this is why
good.
I hide myself away, because you and I could talk all day long,
all day,
and never get anything done. Brian, dude, thank you so much.
We get stuff done.
Lots and lots of stuff done. We're working on getting that helmet up in your corner put away and switching it out with something.
I'm so excited for the Cowboys draft picks this year. This is our year. Mark my words. This is our year. Okay.
All right. Well, we have it recorded right now. Brian Clark believes.
I've said that every year for the last 25 years.
When's the last time they won a Super Bowl?
1995.
You and the Bengals won it?
When?
Never. All right. This has been awesome. We love having you guys around. There's so many ways that you can connect with us as a church. You can find us on Facebook, Northview Christian Church. You can go to our website, northviewchristian.org. We would love for you to join us on an online service. You can do that Sunday mornings at 9 and 10:45 at northview.online.church. We have loved hanging out with you. Hope that you have enjoyed this as well. Share some comments, share some love with us. Let us know you listen, and we will catch you guys next time. See ya.
See you guys.